You may know that in order to reach your full potential on the drums, you absolutely have to master hand technique. But you also know that you would much rather play the drums than sit there at your pad practicing rudiments for hours and hours. So what's the best approach here? Well, I'm going to teach you the method that I've been teaching my students for years. Honestly, I think it is the more fun route to go, maybe a little bit controversial, and I'll explain why, but it just might be for you. You can do this. Hey, welcome to the Non-Glamorous Drummer. I'm so glad you're here hanging out with me today. I help hobby drummers and semi-pro players become the musicians that others actually want to play with and want to have in their band and want to listen to, which is really cool. We do this by teaching you the core drumming skills that really matter, that get you results fast, and that save you time in the practice room. Speaking of, how would you like to know the fastest way to master the drums? Now, it seems like a big question, but wouldn't it be great if there's a faster way to do this, because we're all busy, we only have so much time. The thing is, there are a million things you could be practicing. Honestly, there's a lot of things you could be practicing, but the truth is you don't have to practice everything in order to master the drums. If you focus on these three core areas that we break down in the guide, you're going to master the drums much more quickly without practicing all the millions of things out there on YouTube. I want to keep this simple for you because time is limited, time is of the essence, and I want you to reach your goals and reach your dreams as quickly as possible. Whatever those goals and dreams might be, I want you to master the drums, and this is your quickest way to doing it. Know what to practice, the 3-part daily practice routine for achieving consistent growth and results in just 30 minutes a day. So if you got 30 minutes a day or a couple hours on the weekend, this is the guide for you, my free gift to you. It's gonna really change the way you practice, and you're always gonna know exactly what to work on next. In the description below. All right, on with today's lesson. You can master hand technique and learn everything you need to know without learning all 40 rudiments, and I'm gonna explain to you why today. So the big reason why this approach is controversial, drumming academia, so to speak, so kind of the music schools, traditional drumming schools, and a lot of traditional methods and a lot of teachers that teach things in the way that they've always been taught. That's kind of what I mean by academia. And I'm not trying to trash academia here because there are a lot of good things being taught in that school of thought. But I've realized my approach is different, and what I teach makes a lot more sense to me and to my students than a lot of times the traditional approach of learn this rudiment, then that rudiment, then that rudiment. And so I'll present all this to you today. I think it's going to make a lot of sense. Basically, academia says, learn your rudiments, they're the building blocks of everything you play. You may have heard that before. You know, it's like your alphabet, and once you learn all your rudiments, then all you gotta do is string them together, and now you've got all sorts of drumming vocabulary, and you can play all the fills you wanna play. That's not true, because most fills you play are built of singles and maybe doubles, but mostly just singles. Honestly, those are our building blocks. If you master singles and doubles, there's your building blocks. Now, yes, those are rudiments, and we'll talk about them a little more in a moment, but it's those simple ones, those very simple things that we end up using the most. The big problem, honestly, and the reason why this is even something that we're talking about today, is that I've seen that most students end up working on the rudiments, maybe all 40 of them, without mastering the actual motion or technique necessary to play them well. I'll say that again. A lot of students, and this applies to like kids in band especially, college percussion students, a lot of students who are learning all these things, the traditional rudimentary approach, they end up being able to play all the rudiments and, you know, check all the boxes, done that, like doing the homework, but they've done so without actually mastering the motions and the proper techniques for really making them sound good and really mastering them. And that's a problem. That's a real problem, because a lot of times the goal is learn all your rudiments, but we're not talking about, well, why? And what are we trying to gain by learning the rudiments? When we start asking those questions, we start to realize, maybe we don't actually need to practice all the rudiments. I will say, to rudiments' credit, that they provide a really nice step-by-step progression. And so you can work rudiments in order. You can go to the Vic Firth website and go through the whole like rudiment school thing on there, and it's cool. And you always know, okay, I'm going to work on this one, then this one, then this one. And so it is an organized step-by-step approach. And so some people really like that kind of approach. But I found that for most of my students and myself, we want to play the drums. And actually, I remember hearing a drummer in an interview. It was a famous drummer, I forget who, talking about how the best advice that he heard as a young kid coming up, starting to play gigs, was stop playing your rudiments and start playing your drums. Forget all that rudiment stuff. Actually play your drums. Focus on making music. And that was the best advice he'd gotten, and it changed his course, really. And so yes, rudiments can have their value, but we also want to make music. We want to play the drums. So where we want to go next, because we got to take a balanced approach to this. I'm not telling you to ignore all rudiments, because there are actually 3 rudiments you really have to learn no matter what. And so what we're getting into today is, what do we need to learn? What should we leave at the table? What should we ignore? The 3 rudiments that you really have to learn no matter what, and I already mentioned 2 of them: singles, doubles, and paradiddles. Now I don't want to misquote him, I think it was jazz drummer Ralph Peterson. I think I heard him say at a clinic, there are really only 2 rudiments, singles and doubles. And that's right. You know, when you strip everything down to the bare basics, if you master your singles and you master your doubles, you're always using some combination of those 2 things in every other rudiment you do. And paradiddles are a direct combination of singles and doubles. But because paradiddles are such a unique kind of standalone thing, I like to go ahead and classify them here with the 3 that you do need to know. So singles, it's an obvious, they are our core building blocks of a lot of what we play on the drums, and you've got to master singles because that's what we're doing so many times with fills. So much of what we play is built around singles, so it's an obvious, yes, you have to practice that. Doubles, if you want to be able to play rolls, whether it's a buzz roll, an open double stroke roll, or you want to build finger technique, you want to get better at rebound, get smoother, more fluid, work your dynamics, so many things you can gain from practicing doubles. It's very important. Doubles help a lot with finger technique. You have to use your fingers when you're playing doubles. And so we gain a lot by practicing doubles. And so that's something you have to not ignore. There are lessons on this channel going more in depth about doubles. And then why paradiddles? Because paradiddles really shift the focus from what are our hands doing to what's our brain having to do to get our hands to play when they're supposed to. Paradiddles really push that hand-to-hand coordination, especially if you practice them where you accent one hand and not the other. So instead of just playing, you can accent the right hand and go, and then switch around, accent the left. If you think you've mastered a paradiddle, double check it by doing that and make sure you can pass the accent test. So practice going like this. And so phasing in and out and going from loud right hand, soft left hand to vice versa. If you can do that, that means that your ear is able to individually listen to each hand, and you actually have a much better handle on the pattern. You fully memorize that pattern. That's a great way to practice different stickings. If you're working out of George Lawrence Stone's stick control, where you've got all these different sticking patterns, practice it that way. Accenting a hand, ghosting the other, and switching it around the other way. Practice going in and out of that. Practice them softly, loudly. That's how you can extract the most value out of paradiddles, honestly. And so that's the huge reason why we want to practice them, so we can build that hand-to-hand coordination, solid 2-way coordination that we can apply to a lot of other things around the kit. So my controversial approach, part 1 really, is only focus on those first 3 rudiments. And actually, if you look at a rudiment chart, paradiddles are not number 3. They're somewhere else in the list. But generally, singles, doubles, paradiddles, that's a great way to think of these in terms of simple to a little bit more complex. Just focus on those 3. So that's our part 1 here. I want that in your head. And now we'll move on to, well, how do we handle all the skills and all the things that we could learn with the rest of the paradiddles? This is the alternate approach that avoids all the other important rudiments, because there are other rudiments that can teach you important things, and you will, don't misunderstand me today, you will learn a lot of things by practicing a lot of rudiments if you practice them well. And that's the key. I've seen too many students not really practicing them well and just checking boxes, and that's the big problem. But if you practice them well, you're going to gain a lot. But the thing is, you don't have to practice these specific rudiments to gain these certain skills. There are other things you can do, and that's what I want to show you today in more of a drum set context, really. So what we're looking at is the molar 2-stroke that we might use on hi-hat, and also ghosting. Now I know this sounds totally not rudimentary because we're talking about motions here, but this will start to make sense. It'll start to come together as I explain it more. So in order to play a molar 2-stroke, so I call it molar 2-stroke because we're going loud, soft, and we're kind of getting a 2 for the price of 1. And that's what we might do all the time on a 16th one-handed hi-hat groove, like that. And so we can practice that on the hats, practice that on the pad. But the idea is that we're taking that bounce, that free bounce that'll happen. And this is a skill, by the way, that we learn when we're playing doubles. We break this down more in another more in-depth lesson I'll link below. But if we're allowing that free rebound to happen, we're playing slow doubles, then we just want to close that gap and get this happening over and over again. So instead of this, we want to close it and turn it into until it becomes smooth and we can start getting into an up and down motion. And what we're having to do as we do that is handle the rebound, which is a skill we learned from doubles, but we're also having to manipulate the rebound a little bit because the stick wants to actually bounce up pretty high. It wants to go like this, but we're having to firm things up a little bit and choke it out a little bit. And that's where things are kind of interesting because there are rudiments that teach that. Now, skipping over to ghosting, that other thing that we want to work on, and it tends to target the left hand more because we're using left hand for ghosting, but we want to practice each of these things with each hand. When we're ghosting, the big challenge is, well, how do we go from a ghost note to a backbeat and from a backbeat to a ghost note? That requires a lot of rebound control in order to pull off such a dynamic contrast. If we go from ghost note to backbeat, we're having to go like this. It's like a tap, boom. And then if we go back to a ghost note, we have to choke out that big stroke there, really choke out the rebound, so then we can do that. What's interesting is there's a lot of overlap here. What we're learning going from soft to loud and back to soft is very similar to what we end up doing as we're practicing that whole molar thing. Because essentially what you're doing, when you're playing softly, you're gripping more firmly, fingers gently wrapped around the stick like this. But when you want to play loudly, you've got to throw the stick up, extend the fingers, allow that full stroke to happen. And so that means it's almost like touching a hot stove where we've got to snap the stick back. We're starting off down here. It's like the drum is on fire and we got to get the stick out of there. Pop the stick up, which is just a flick of the wrist, toss of the wrist. Not a whole lifting of the arm, but a tossing, flicking of the wrist that helps toss it up. We can kind of do that with our fingers too. Almost like this sort of motion, if I were to exaggerate it, fingers doing it, but really that's kind of a sloppy way to do it. We want to just toss up with the wrist. And so tap, toss, it's like we're creating this massive artificial rebound. Then throw the stick down, and after it plays that accent, choking out. The stick's naturally going to bounce to right here, but we want to bring it to rest about right here so we can play that tap. So to review, we're going tap, accent, tap. And by the way, it seems like this is always the case. There's always a lesson here on the channel that goes more in depth with whatever thing I'm talking about. And so there's a lesson specifically on ghosting where we break this down and I give you some exercises and a lot of specifics for working this. So go check that out if you want to dig more into this. So the whole idea here is we're having to use these motions to control the stick height and control our rebound and whether or not the rebound happens. We're creating an artificial rebound in this case by tossing the stick up. And so we're learning these motions. Well, it turns out this is really the alternate approach to learning flam rudiments, any rudiments that have accents, any rudiments that have roughs or drags, and doubles are also kind of helping with that, kind of hitting that spot. And really, kind of to sum this up, this is a substitute for any rudiment that requires big dynamic contrasts, where either you've got accents, so you're doing accents and then taps, or if you're doing flams. So if we're playing flams, the traditional flam rudiment is this. So first we've got right, flamming with the left, and then we switch to flamming this way. So the grace note is with the right. So it's right, left, right, and essentially look at what each hand is doing. There's that molar motion, and the same thing that we're doing when ghosting. So it's very interesting how all the flam rudiments are helping solidify that, just like the ones that involve accents and all the different flam variations and all the accent different rudiments. The ones with roughs and drags where you're having to play quiet little roughs or drags mixed in with accents, and the doubles are going to help you play that. So all of that, if we boil all of those other rudiments down to the bare bones, we know that, okay, we work on our singles, doubles, and paradiddles. That's going to help us with that. But besides those three essentials, really we've just got to learn how to control our stick height and how to control our rebound and how to play softly and quickly go from softly to loudly and from loud back to soft. If we can do that and have full control over what height our sticks are at, we can play with massive dynamic contrasts. We can do ghosting in a groove very cleanly and precisely. We can do molar patterns here. We can do like a blues shuffle where the left hand's doing boom, ba-ba, boom, ba-ba, boom, ba-ba. We can do whatever kind of timekeeping pattern with the right hand, like, and make it feel really cool. Or has a nice bounce to it because we're working on that ability of controlling the dynamics within what we're doing because we're mastering these motions. So you can learn these things by learning all those other rudiments. That's a route you can take, a path you can take. Or you can learn that by focusing on kind of these two areas of working on molar, which stems from doubles, or the whole ghosting thing of soft, loud, soft, because that gives you the ability to play the flams. And meanwhile, if you're practicing your doubles and you're practicing them softly, plus you're practicing these dynamic differences, you can nail the roughs and the drags and the accents. All of that comes together, all under that umbrella of motion. We're learning rebound control and motion, and when we've mastered that, we could actually then dive back into the rudiments and play them much better. So kind of to wrap this up, the core skills here are not the rudiments or even the exercises that I just showed you. The core skills here are the motions. And that's what people have got to get past. Because if you've been paying attention, if you've stuck with me this far, you're noticing that, oh, Stephen is not anti-establishment here with the rudiments. It's that he just has a different approach. That's kind of where I'm trying to land this, that I don't disagree with rudiments, and I'm not saying rudiments are bad and that you're not going to learn a lot from them. But I'm saying this approach might be better. And it's definitely more fun. And it's what works great with my students. It's what's worked well with me. And it's more directly applicable to drum set because we're teaching the core things, the core motions. If you're trying to learn rudiments, but you're missing the core fundamental techniques and motions behind them, where does that leave you? And so that's what I feel like is missing a lot of times in that academic approach, rudimentary approach to snare drumming and to the whole approach that's going to happen in band and in the percussion world. It's very easy to check boxes and learn exercises without really learning those motions. So it's not what you practice, it's how you practice it. And so what we want to do is learn these motions, that's our how, and we could either use those in practicing rudiments or use those in practicing molar and ghosting. Either way, it's going to give us the skills that we need. Now, before we go, the question worth answering is, when should you learn all the rudiments? Is there a case where you actually should learn all 40 rudiments and maybe some additional, hybrid rudiments on top of that? Well, if you're interested in marching band or drum corps, you definitely need to work on your rudiments. If you're a high school student and you're wanting to major in music, I majored in music. I have a percussion performance degree. I had to do a lot of the rudimental stuff in preparation for college auditions. So if that's you, you've got to learn the rudiments. That's kind of a given. If you want to play like Buddy Rich or Dave Weckl or any crazy chops drummer, you definitely got to learn your rudiments. If you're more into jazz or maybe fusion than pop, rock, country, singer-songwriter, then maybe you should spend some time practicing rudiments. That is going to help you out with those more complex, busier, chops-based genres. But, and the big but, even if that's you, even if you're a high school student preparing for music school and college, or you're a college student, you're wanting to get into a drum corps, or you're wanting to play like Dave Weckl or Buddy Rich or JoJo Mayer, any of those crazy chops guys, you still have to start with singles, doubles, and paradiddles. Let's be honest. You still have to start there with the core basics, and you still have to work on the fundamental technique and the motions, because if your grip is wonky, if something's up with your grip and you don't have your fulcrum squared away, all this is worthless. So you've got to work on those fundamentals first. It's not what you practice, it's how you practice it. And so even if you're wanting to be the chops guy, even if you're wanting to go the rudiments route, you've still got to take this in stride and go step by step and make sure you're keeping everything in perspective and working on what you need to work on. Question for you. Should you make a shift away from rudiments or even away from licks and instead focus on motion? Is motion an area in your practicing you haven't really worked on? Like, have you ever thought about, all right, what do I need to do to play loud versus soft and to mix backbeats with ghost notes? What can I do to improve my molar two-stroke, to play those 16th kind of grooves better? Maybe you need to make a shift away from like practicing the exercises and focusing more on, well, what are my hands doing? Because remember, this is the core of the core. What is your hand doing? Because if there's an issue, if something's not working right, it likely has to do with your hand, and maybe your hand is getting in its own way. Maybe you need to mess with your grip, check this out, and figure out, all right, I need to work on my fulcrum, extending my fingers. I've got other videos here on the channel that go in depth about this to really make sure. As a matter of fact, 3 ways to test your grip, a recent lesson a few weeks ago. Check that one out so you can test out your grip and make sure you're squared away and you're ready to go, getting maximum rebound and fluidity. That's important. Make sure these core things are in place. Maybe that's the shift you've got to make. Focus on the fundamentals, and then you can dive back into whatever it was you were working on. What is the best approach for you? That's the question. What is your best approach? If you're somebody who enjoys practicing rudiments, you like that structured approach, great, go for it. But make sure that you're mastering your singles, doubles, paradiddles first, and you're practicing at all dynamics. You've got your grip squared away. Make sure the fundamentals are in place, and then you can do what you want to. As long as you got the foundation established, you're not gonna go wrong. Before you go, be sure to check out that 3-part practice guide. It really is your hack for making faster progress. It's the best way to grow the most quickly on the drums because it pinpoints, here's what you need to be working on with hand technique, here's some coordination exercises. When you're focusing on hand technique, coordination, and music and listening, you grow really fast because that is a balanced practice session. That's what I want you doing. So when you're practicing in that balanced way, even if you just got 30 minutes a day, you can grow very quickly. So no more wondering what you need to practice, no more wasting time plateauing and stagnating and wondering, why am I not growing? Why am I not reaching my goals? I want to become a great drummer, but I don't know what to practice. No more excuses. Download the guide, 3-part practice routine for busy drummers. Even if you just got 30 minutes a day or a couple hours on the weekend, it's going to help you out. My free gift to you, no brainer. Go grab it. All right, as always, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I enjoyed hanging out today. Hope you have a great week. Know that no matter what, you can do this. When you put your mind to it and you're dedicated and you practice the stuff I tell you to practice, you can master the drums. I believe in you. Hope you believe in you too. Hope you have a great week. I'll see you on the next lesson. You can do this.